And so anyway, I put all this together, ran it through the computer, and I found one variable that had a strong pattern to it. And the strong pattern was, the newer the home, the more likely to be destroyed. So homes that were built back in the 1960s, they all did pretty well. You know, a few shingles off the roof. The homes that were built in the late 1980s, those were trashed. So how did this happen? So we wound up looking at other things, again, using the computer. We looked at campaign contributions to the politicians that made decisions about the building code, because clearly the building code had been weakened. And so we took all the campaign contribution reports, put them in the computer, and we were able to show the heavy influence of the building industry on the politicians. You know, demonstrate that, you know, the most powerful voice in the groups that were making these decisions about the building code, in fact, were the builders who wanted to be able to build houses more cheaply so that they could sell more houses. We also looked at building inspection records, millions of building inspection records. You know, clearly this is not something you can do by looking at pieces of paper. But by getting it all on, you know, on computer data, putting it into the computer and studying it, we were able to show that basically the building inspectors were so overworked that they were, you know, they were doing roof inspections. Some inspectors were inspecting like 70 roofs in a day, which is pretty much driving past them and saying, yes, there's a roof, and then going on to the next one. So, you know, that's no way, obviously, to be able to build strong homes. So anyway, we looked at that problem all the way around. We wound up doing a big report called What Went Wrong, and basically we decided this was not an act of God, this was in fact our own stupidity. We had allowed the building codes to get changed over the years. Other kinds of big things. The Wall Street Journal about 3 years ago did a look at what are called stock options, which are supposed to be incentives for corporate executives to make their companies more valuable. By giving the executive the option to buy stock in that company, and then the executive can keep that option for several years. If the company becomes more valuable, the stock becomes more valuable, they can then sell it, and they make the difference. But what the Wall Street Journal did was studied the dates when the stock options were being given. It was actually to more than 200 companies, and was able to show that for again about 200 companies, the stock options that were being granted just happened to be at the place where the stock value happened to be lowest in the previous couple of years. And they actually calculated, what is the chance that that could happen, that they just happened to give this incredibly low value. And what they were able to prove was that in fact the companies, the boards of directors, were backdating the options. They were basically doing it in a way to make these options even more valuable for these executives, and thereby not give them much incentive to make the company worth more. So, and that in fact is actually illegal to do that. So the Wall Street Journal exposed that practice. Washington Post, a young intern, she was actually a student at the University of Missouri. She had a summer internship at the Washington Post, and she was using some data gathered by the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, on police shootings around the country. Every time a police officer gets into a gunfight with a criminal, has to shoot somebody, there's information gathered about it. Anyway, she took this data and was analyzing it using a spreadsheet like Microsoft Excel, and did a little bit of analysis and some sorting, and discovered that the city of Washington, D.C. police force had by far the highest rate of police shootings of any other city in the country. You know, way out of bounds with what else was going on elsewhere. So she took her printout, she went over to one of the editors and said, gee, do you guys know this? That we're actually, you know, the worst in the country? No, the Washington Post didn't know this, but they were then obviously alerted to it. They wound up doing a big study of the problem of police shootings and discovered that, you know, the training was very bad. There are a whole variety of reasons for this happening. But all this is because some young intern was able to take data, put it in the computer, and find the pattern in there. This was fun. I worked with this one, and actually the reporter who worked on it was the same Bill Dedman who had done the Atlanta Journal-Constitution story. Black drivers, minority drivers in Massachusetts around Boston were complaining that police officers were stopping them. You know, even while they're just driving along, doing nothing, they're being stopped by the police and being, you know, the cars are being searched and, you know, their licenses are being checked to make sure they weren't suspended and that kind of thing. And, you know, black drivers are saying, you know, driving while black, that is our offense. Which shouldn't be. And of course the police are saying, oh no, we're not being prejudiced or anything like that. We just, you know, we just stop when we feel there's somebody that needs to be stopped. So enough of these complaints had happened that the Massachusetts legislature required the police for about a 6-month period, anytime they stopped anybody, they were supposed to gather a bunch of information about whoever they stopped. And, you know, information like, again, age and race and gender and how fast the person was going and where the location of it was and which police department, all these other kinds of information. And then also whether or not the person got a ticket. Were they given a ticket or were they just given a warning? Okay, so all this information was there. Bill Dedman got the idea of, okay, let's take that data, let's analyze it. So I worked with him on doing this. And we found it was fascinating what you could find in there. For one thing, there was clear evidence of a considerable difference. Black drivers overall had a substantially higher risk of getting a ticket than white drivers for the same thing. We did look at other sort of patterns that were in there. To me, one of the, well, two interesting things. One was there was in fact one major police department in Massachusetts that had no discrimination in it. They were treating black and white drivers equally. It was the Massachusetts State Police, and it turned out the reason why is they had a very strong training program to make officers aware of their own, you know, internal prejudices, to make them think about those kinds of things and so on. And what it proved is with the right kind of training, you can get away from that kind of discrimination. The other interesting thing, I thought, was we also looked at which groups had the least chance of actually getting a ticket, would just get a warning. Which group do you think was the least likely to get tickets? Women, okay? Not only that, but young women. That advantage disappears at about age 40. So use it while you got it. That's the lesson, okay? But that's probably true everywhere. But anyway, that was, you know, again, a clear pattern in the data. Another Washington Post study looked at deaths of children that were supposed to be taken care of by the social service agencies. You know, another good story. The Miami Herald wound up getting a civic election overturned because they were able to prove how the votes were being stolen, again, by studying the patterns with the computer. Just have a couple of examples of the growing number of examples being done around the world. In Brazil, O Globo had done a study of prisoners who were being released early from the prisons in Brazil. It turned out they had strong family connections to politicians. You know, they're able to, again, demonstrate that if you had those kinds of connections, you're much more likely to get early release. And in the UK, The Guardian, which has done actually a whole bunch of really interesting computer-assisted data kinds of stories. In fact, they have a thing they call the data blog now, where you can sort of look at all the stuff that they work with. They did a study looking at the spending by members of parliament a couple of years ago, and by analyzing it and in fact asking people who lived around members of parliament for information about the kinds of things they were spending on, they discovered members of parliament who were using, you know, public money to have their homes fixed up and to add new roads to their you know, their country homes, and you know, adding spas and things like that, and they're all, again, using public money that they weren't supposed to be doing. So all these kinds of things could have been found using the computer. Computer-assisted reporting is not just for the really big projects. It can be done for all kinds of other sort of daily kinds of stories as well. Probably the best read computer-assisted reporting story I ever did involved dog licenses in Miami. I went to the, you know, in the U.S., if you get a dog, you're supposed to get a license. You know, you fill out information. It has information like, of course, your address and your name, but also has the breed of the dog, the age of the dog, the name of the dog, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, we got it on computer. We used the computer to analyze it and produced a, you know, basically a, you know, fun story looking at what are the most popular breeds of dogs, the most popular names, the, you know, the, what was it, Poodles and Dobermans were the two most popular in Miami, which says a lot about Miami, I guess. You know, people are not very creative with their names. There were thousands of collies named Lassie, that kind of thing. But then there were strange ones. You know, the you know, hundreds of people who would actually name their dog after themselves. You know, it's like saying, "Come on, Steve. Come on." Come on, Steve. You know, why would people do that? You know, little tiny chihuahuas named Killer. You know, great big mastiffs named Fifi. You know, so anyway, all kinds. But believe me, you know, you do a story using all that and have some tables and so on, and believe me, everybody was reading it and talking about it and so on. That was computer-assisted reporting. Crime reports. Almost every paper in the country now is sort of regularly doing little crime maps. You know, every week they'll get the data from the police, make a little map of the city, show the hot spots of where crimes are occurring and so on, because people are interested in the crime that's happening near them. Parking tickets. This was a fun one. We had gotten the database in Miami of all the parking tickets that had been given, including information about who hadn't paid their parking tickets. Okay, you know, when you park, you're supposed to do it. If you know, if the meter runs out, you get a ticket. And so we were trying to do a story on sort of, you know, where are you most likely to get parking tickets, what times of day, all that kind of stuff could be done. But again, we also had this list of all the people who had not paid lots of their tickets. And as we're putting this list together, I looked at the list and I realized, uh-oh, and had to go into the managing editor's office with an assistant city editor and say, Jay Ducassi, who was our assistant city editor, I said, Jay has about 300 unpaid parking tickets. It was from back when he was covering the courts, and you know, he'd go cover a thing and he couldn't get out to finish it, you know, to put more coins in the meter, and so he'd find a parking ticket and he'd just stuff it in his glove compartment and ignore it, and so on. So anyway, he had hundreds of parking tickets. The managing editor said, Jay, write a check right now, and he made him, you know, it was thousands of dollars that he had to pay, and we still put his name in the story. You know, we had to point out that that in fact our own guy was one of the bad ones. But that's a good story. I mean, this is the kind of thing, again, people care about. People, you know, everybody gets parking tickets at some point or other. Everybody gets, you know, speeding tickets. Everybody has dogs. All those kinds of things are things that can be studied. This was kind of fun. A friend of mine, one of the really good computer-assisted reporting people, Jennifer LaFleur, did basically a text analysis of personal ads. You know what I mean by personal ads? Those, you know, men seeking women, women seeking men, you know, all those things that are in the back of the magazine. You know, men seeking men, women seeking women, all that kind of stuff. You know, men seeking animals, whatever. So anyway, she did this analysis of the kinds of characteristics that each group was looking for in the other group. And for women, discovered, no surprise, you know, women are looking for men to be, you know, strong and caring and sensitive, and, you know, they want to do nice walks on the beach and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And guess what the characteristics men are seeking for, you know? You know, we're dogs, let's face it. I mean, we're just, it was awful. You know, it's very obvious, you know, it's all about appearance and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, again, that's talk about a computer-assisted reporting story that everybody was reading and talking about. School test scores, you know, school ability to actually teach the students is an important issue. A great amount of taxes go into it, and so we pay a lot of attention to the test scores. In the United States, it had gotten to the point of perhaps paying over attention. We had, when President Bush was in office, he created something called No Child Left Behind, which basically said that almost every school had to get better. and which therefore put a lot of pressure on all the schools. And so we started doing studies where we were looking at how school test scores were changing over time. And not surprisingly, most schools, you know, if they had a particular overall average test score this year, next year's test score might be a little bit higher, a little bit lower, something like that, but it would be very similar. And you could plot it, and it'd be if you've ever seen an XY scatter plot, they would all be in a pretty much straight line. Except when reporters started doing these kinds of analyses, they found often a number of cases of schools that suddenly had huge increases in their test scores. You know, schools that had not been very good, and all of a sudden were among the best in the state in the test scores. That either means